he'll definitely be interested to see what it sounds like. But I don't really care whether he's jealous or not jealous or whatever.
Have you ever thought about what happens when a famous rock star calls out some of the biggest bands in the world? So, Slash, the famous guitarist from Guns N' Roses, has done just that.
Sort of the way the music industry works and the way radio works and this and that and the other, sometimes it gets sort of, so it's good to keep, you know, to recognize it for what it is.
He named 5 big bands that he doesn't like, and the reasons are shocking. These bands were way off for Slash, with silly outfits and music that sounds too safe. Come with us as we talk about which bands made his list and why. Don't miss this.
How did Guns N' Roses come about?
It was the perfect combination of people. I think I've always said that we were the only 5 people that could have made that band.
Number 5, Kiss. Everybody knows Kiss as one of the best rock bands ever. It looks like Slash's name should be written in bright lights next to it with a big... They stood out in the rock world with their big personalities, flashy outfits, and over-the-top performances, but Slash didn't like that. Kiss is seen by most as the height of rock and roll show, but Slash saw them as the very worst of what was wrong with the genre. They weren't a rock band to him. They were a show, and not in the honest, gritty, and sincere way that rock music should be played. Kiss, on the other hand, had turned rock into a business, a slick business that could be sold. That was the last thing Slash ever wanted to stand for. In the 1970s and 1980s, Kiss summed up glam rock with their crazy costumes, large stage shows, and stage characters. They put on shows that were bigger than life, with props, fire breathing, and blasts. But Slash wasn't happy. At its core, he thought rock music should be about the song. It wasn't about the show or putting on an ego show. It was about feeling, being real, and being raw. Along with Kiss's over-the-top glam appearance, he thought it was fake and lacking soul and authenticity. That was more important than what it said. But why did Slash care so much about it? He got his start in the Los Angeles music scene, where he learned the ropes. In the early days of Guns N' Roses, Slash would spend hours playing with the band's original drummer, Steven Adler, who was a huge Kiss fan. Adler would play Kiss songs during practice a lot in order to get Slash on board with their sound. Slash got angrier and angrier as he heard more. Their happy, catchy songs didn't excite him. Instead, they made him angry. He thought the music was too simple. Nothing real could be heard by Slash. All he could feel was Kiss's marketing machine. It was all about the show and the image. For Slash, their music was more of a product than an art form. Slash didn't just dislike Kiss's looks. He also didn't like how their music sounded. He didn't care about breaking the rules or making something new. What mattered to him was following a formula, the formula of what would sell. He felt farther away from them the more he heard their songs. They didn't care about following a plan, but Guns N' Roses had a completely different goal. They meant to break it. For Slash, it wasn't about following the rules of the business. His opinion was that Kiss didn't understand what it meant to play from the heart. Over time, Slash's dislike for Kiss turned more personal. It wasn't just the music that made Guns N' Roses stand out when they first became famous. It was the way they acted. They didn't care about fitting in with the rest of the business, and they didn't need costumes or showmanship to stand out. Guns N' Roses was all about rough, dirty rock. Being pretty or well-groomed wasn't important. It was about feeling, defiance, and being real, which were all things Slash thought Kiss was missing. As Guns N' Roses became more well-known, the problems between Slash and Kiss turned into a real feud. It was personal, not just about style. The fight reached its peak when Slash's friendship with Kiss's lead singer, Paul Stanley, turned soured. It didn't take long for things to get really heated between them, because they had very different ideas about rock and roll. Stan says in his autobiography that Slash's comments about Kiss caused a rift that lasted for almost 20 years. Their fight, which had more to do with pride than music, went on for years. It was clear that this wasn't just a small argument, even though Stanley didn't go into details about what was said. The impact was very bad and went deep. Slash saw Kiss as everything he didn't want to be as he learnt more about rock music. He didn't like their sound, how they looked, or how they played rock music. Slash saw Kiss as the commercialization of rock music. It was all about the show with their huge stage shows, flashy characters, and polished radio-friendly hits. That wasn't how rock and roll was meant to be, though. Rock had to come from inside, and the sound that went along with them had to be real. It had to be about anger, love, sadness, and happiness. To fit a mass market, it wasn't meant to be figured out or cleaned up. Focusing on the image, the brand, and selling an image was a slap in the face for Slash to everything that rock was built on. Rock music wasn't meant to be about making a character. It was meant to be about making music that people could feel. The point wasn't to hide the lack of content with fireworks and face paint. Slash really wanted to keep rock real, even if that meant not liking everything that was hot at the time. Not only did Slash think this way, the difference between Kiss and Guns N' Roses was a sign of a bigger change in rock music culture in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Kiss was one of the first bands to play glam rock, which liked big shows and characters that were too good to be true. Guns N' Roses, on the other hand, came from the rough parts of Los Angeles, where rock was more about how you felt than how you looked. The Guns N' Roses band, led by Slash, wasn't just playing for the crowd. Their music was enough to draw attention to itself, so they didn't need to wear masks. The next band we'll talk about is one that Slash didn't like. This one was big in the glam metal scene of the 1980s. But while Kiss was all about the show, this band, Poison, took it even further. For Slash, they were the personification of all that was fake about rock music. Watch out, because Guns N' Roses and Poison are about to get even more competitive. Number 4. Poison. The 1980s saw Poison become very popular. It was like a shot of glitter and hairspray going right into the heart of rock and roll. Poison was known for their wild glam metal look, which they cultivated with flashy tights, lots of makeup, and hair that was so teased it looked like a lion's mane. They did things that screamed, "Look at me!" on the Sunset Strip, which was their kingdom. The late 1980s rock scene was dying for music like Poison's, with its catchy hooks and glam look. Everyone else liked their party songs and over-the-top shows, but Slash wasn't one of them. Slash didn't hold back when he talked about Poison. He wasn't afraid to call them out, calling them posers, which is a strong word in the rock world. Poison wasn't a real rock to Slash. They put too much effort into how their music looked and not enough into what rock music is really about, real emotion and feeling. While Poison worked on improving their look, Slash was really into Guns N' Roses' messy rock with blues influences. He thought Poison was the face of everything wrong with the glam metal scene. They put style over content. It wasn't about the real music. It was about making money for the band. They had the right look, but did they really feel the music? That was a firm no for Slash. Poison's popularity wasn't just due to their catchy songs or flashy looks. The whole music business was moving towards visuals at the time they were made. There were a lot of bands like Poison on the Sunset Strip, all trying to get the attention of record companies and fans. It was this for Slash, though. At that time, the business didn't care about what a band stood for or the songs they made. It had to do with how they looked and how they could be sold. Poison was perfect for that role, and Slash hated it. He thought rock music should come from the heart, not from having to carefully plan how to sell it. Poison wasn't about defiance, being raw, or being real. They were about fitting into a mold that the music business wanted them to make. Another thing that made Slash dislike Poison even more was a fan who spoke out in support of Slash's views. Someone in the crowd knew that Slash didn't like Poison, so they spoke out. What happened next, though, was shocking. The band is said to have gotten back at this fan. Members of Poison are said to have thrown ice and beer at a fan at a show, which was seen as rude and didn't go over well with anyone. That wasn't the only time something like that happened. It is said that Poison's management tried to hide it, which made things worse. For Slash, this made him even angrier at the band. They were a bad example of everything that was wrong with rock, and they couldn't take criticism well either. Their critics were not welcome, so they decided to shut them up in a rude way. Slash didn't just hate Poison on the outside, though. It was a more personal link, and it was only temporary, but still important. Before Guns N' Roses became the huge band they are now, Slash tried out for Poison for a short time. For any aspiring rock artist, this gig could have been a dream come true. But for Slash, it taught him what he didn't want. Even though the interview was short, it taught me a lot. Slash knew right away that he didn't fit in with Poison's glam rock style and image. Their carefully planned shows and carefully made image didn't fit with Slash's idea of rock. He loved raw energy, improvising, and letting his feelings out without any filters. Slash thought rock was all about simple, straightforward moves, but Poison's use of flashy, coordinated moves was the exact opposite. In the years that followed, Slash made it clear that he didn't just dislike Poison's image, he disliked the whole genre. People often said that the glam metal scene, which Poison loved, put too much emphasis on looks over music. It was not the same with Slash's Guns N' Roses. In rock, they were the losers. They were dirty and raw, without any of Poison's polish. The members of Guns N' Roses weren't trying to fit in or sell a way of life. Instead, they were making music that showed how chaotic and rebellious their lives were. Slash thought that Poison's over-the-top antics were a fake form of rock that cared more about how they looked on MTV than how they made him feel. But Slash didn't just dislike glam metal because of Poison. It was about all the bad things about the scene in the 1980s. As bands like Poison ruled the charts with their flashy looks and catchy songs, Guns N' Roses fought for something different. Slash and his friends were set on showing that rock wasn't just about making money or making everyone happy. It was about having heart, soul, and being real, which he thought Poison lacked. Even if they sold a lot of records and packed stadiums, Slash didn't respect a band that wasn't really living and breathing rock and roll. We're going to talk about a band that played polished, formulaic rock in the next part. However, this time, they would become the face of everything that was wrong with the genre. Stay tuned as we talk about Nickelback, a band that Slash wouldn't hold back on. Number 3. Nickelback. The rise of Nickelback to fame in the early 2000s was a big deal that no one could miss. Their hit rock songs like How You Remind Me and Photograph were played over and over again on the radio and made them one of the most popular bands of the decade. Nickelback seemed like a surefire rock hit on paper. Their songs had catchy hooks, words that people could relate to, and a sound that was perfect for radio. But with Slash, it seemed like everything they did was meant to make money instead of making something important. And that's where the trouble began. Nickelback isn't even a rock band, Slash famously said about Nickelback, and he wasn't just being rude. It was his criticism of a whole type of music that he thought had become too simple and predictable. He thought that Nickelback's music was too smooth and calm for real rock. He thought they were more interested in making people happy than in making something real or scary. While Nickelback tried to write songs that would please as many people as possible, they lost touch with what their music was really about. They were working on a formula that would work on the radio, instead of making music that came from real feelings or situations which didn't sit right with Slash. Slash thought Nickelback was a great example of how rock music had become too commercialized and lost its edge. The band's sound was smooth, well thought out, and simple, which made it perfect for big-time success. But for Slash, this perfect finish was what was wrong. Cleansing true rock so that a lot of people could listen to it wasn't the point. It was meant to be loud, messy, and not cleaned up. Slash thought that Nickelback's music was too expected, too well put together, and made to please radio stations and streaming services. No matter how simple the sound was, it wasn't about artistic freedom or expression. It was about making hit after hit that would easily make it onto the charts. Not long after they were formed, Nickelback was criticized by many people. The band was doing well in the music business, but they were also becoming a joke in pop culture. Nickelback's music was made fun of all the time, from internet jokes to late-night talk shows. There was a negative feeling about the band that seemed to cover everyone. People laughed at their cookie-cutter rock music style, their repetitive words, and the way their guitar riffs were always the same. This reaction was too much for Slash to ignore. He saw Nickelback as a turning point in rock music, a time when the style began to move towards a more commercialized and predictable sound. Slash didn't change his mind about them, even though they were constantly criticized. It only proved what he already thought, that Nickelback's success was a sign that rock music was losing its way. They knew how to write catchy songs that would sell, but their music lacked the depth that made rock music so strong in the first place. Nickelback made songs that were easy to listen to, but lacked the grit and rebellion that made rock really connect with fans. Guns N' Roses, on the other hand, lived on unpredictability and raw emotion, which meant that Slash's music didn't have the spark that makes rock music, well, rock. The magazine Slash says that rock spirit is more than just a catchy riff or a remembered hook. Rock is all about rebelling, being unpredictable, and showing how you really feel. It's about going against the grain, breaking rules, and making music that makes people think. On the other hand, Nickelback didn't say anything new. Their music was good. It was a formula. It was meant to make people happy, not angry. Slash thought that was the exact opposite of what rock should be. Rock music isn't about being safe. It's about taking chances, both musically and mentally. Even though Nickelback was very successful, they didn't have that spirit. Over the years, Nickelback became a symbol of everything Slash thought rock was turning into. Boring, glossy, and most of all, focused on making money. Their rise to fame wasn't about making a statement or moving the genre forward. It was about reaching as many people as possible, which Slash didn't understand. For him, rock was never about fitting in. It was about being different, being real, and loving the mess that came with making music that felt real. Number 2. Coldplay. In the early 2000s, Coldplay took off like a rocket. With their catchy, pop rock sound, the British band quickly became well known. A lot of people heard their powerful songs, such as Fix You, Yellow, and The Scientist. Millions of people liked their sound, and it seemed like they could never stop being successful. Coldplay mixed rock with more accessible pop elements by writing songs that were about deep feelings and making melodies that went on and on. But for Slash, Coldplay's success meant something else. Rock was becoming less hard. and everything that rock should be was being betrayed. It wasn't just the hits that would play on the radio that turned him off. It was the change from music that was raw and unedited to music that was neater and safer. Slash has made it clear what he thinks of Coldplay and their songs. He thinks Coldplay's sound is too soft. He doesn't like how much of a pop influence it has. He thinks that real rock needs a raw edge. Even though Coldplay's melodies are catchy and their words are deep, Slash thought that their music was very different from the rough and tough sound of real rock. He thinks the band's style is too smooth, too mild, and just plain pretty. For Slash, rock music should be about fire, energy, and the kind of unpredictable spirit that comes from loving the messy, flawed aspects of music. Coldplay, on the other hand, seemed to have mastered the art of making music that was pleasant to listen to, but didn't make people feel the way a real rock band should. Slash is angry at bands like Coldplay because he thinks rock music is becoming too commercialized. He thinks that Coldplay is a great example of how rock music has been marketed to a wide audience. Coldplay's popularity wasn't just due to their singing skill, it was also due to how they created a sound that everyone liked. Even though their music might make you feel something, Slash thought it was too safe and planned. Coldplay didn't want to take chances or push the limits of rock. Instead, they wrote songs that were simple to sell, simple to play on the radio, and simple to make a lot of people happy. Slash thinks this is what commercialized music is all about, putting the attention on how well the music can sell and become popular with a wide audience instead of how good the music itself is. Focusing on success over being real is something that Slash has always fought against. The band he's best known for, Guns N' Roses, wasn't about fitting in. It wasn't about making mainstream-friendly music or trying to get songs to the top of the charts. Guns N' Roses was all about raw feeling, wild energy, and expression that wasn't filtered. Their music wasn't like anything else out there. Being real was more important than being perfect or pretty. And Slash thinks that's a big difference between Coldplay and Guns N' Roses. Guns N' Roses made music that was meant to shake things up, while Coldplay made songs that were softly reflective and easy to understand. It wasn't just notes on a page for Slash's guitar solos, they were powerful, emotional bursts. Every riff had the raw spirit of rock and roll in it, while Coldplay's sound seemed too safe and made for mass consumption. There is a big difference between Guns N' Roses' rough, angry rock and Coldplay's soft, smooth pop rock. Even though Coldplay's songs are beautiful and moving, they don't have the rough edges of real rock music. However, Slash's music has the kind of power that makes you want to shout and jump up and down in anger or happiness. Guns N' Roses never thought about how they fit into the music business. They put everything they had into their songs and let it all out. There was no second-guessing or thinking too much. It was honest, real, and raw. Even though Coldplay's smooth ballads were truly felt, they just didn't hit as hard for Slash. They didn't have the chaos, uncertainty, and fire that he loved in rock music. Slash cares a lot about how real the music is. You'll never forget that part of a song that makes it hit you like no other. Slash has always been about telling the truth about how they feel, not just what songs sound good on the charts. They no longer work together after that. It's possible that Coldplay's music will make you feel something, but Slash feels something different when he listens to rock music. He thinks that Coldplay's music is too clean and feels too much like making people feel good without really going deep. Is there anything wrong with making beautiful music that people connect with? For Slash, rock music is about showing the raw emotion behind the sound and digging into the messy parts of life. It's about not being afraid to be real, loud, and crazy. As time goes on, the question still stands. Can a band really call itself rock if it gives up originality to be popular? Slash fights this battle every day between being an artist and making money. In the next part, we'll talk about another band that, like Coldplay, became a huge hit in the music industry, but at what cost? Stay tuned, because Creed is coming up next. Number 1. Creed. It was clear that Creed was on the rise after grunge. They were one of the most popular bands in the late 1990s and early 2000s, thanks to their catchy, spiritual sound. With hits like With Arms Wide Open and My Sacrifice, they ruled the radio and gained millions of fans who connected with their deep words. But Slash didn't like them, even though they were popular. It wasn't that they were successful, but because their music sounded more like a product than real rock. Slash didn't like Creed because their music wasn't very deep. He thought that their sound was too formulaic and overproduced, and that it lacked the raw feeling that makes rock music what it is. Slash liked how unpredictable and edgy rock music could be, but Creed seemed to follow a safe, planned routine to get radio play. For Slash, that wasn't what rock was all about. Every note felt like it was carefully chosen to fit in with the crowd. It wasn't about being clean or polished. It was about being real, raw, and emotional, which he thought Creed's music lacked totally. Slash thought that bands like Creed best showed how rock music was becoming more commercialized. They knew what would make them famous. Words that make you think, a polished sound, and catchy choruses. But for Slash, that was the thing that was wrong with current rock. Music shouldn't come from a marketing plan made to fit radio playlists. It should come from a real place and a raw feeling. Creed may have been able to write hit songs that sold millions of copies, but in the process, they lost the soul of rock. Their music sounded clean and safe, like it was made to please a lot of people, but didn't have any real edge or defiant spirit. It was rock and roll made for a wide audience, and Slash didn't like that. Even though Creed wasn't real, they were a huge commercial hit, which made Slash angry. He thought that their rise showed everything that was wrong with the way rock was going. It wasn't meant for rock to be a routine business. It wasn't designed to appeal to a lot of people. The smooth, radio-friendly hits by Creed showed how the music business had cleaned up rock music by taking away its rough edges and replacing them with songs that could appeal to the most people. It wasn't about breaking the rules or rebelling anymore. It was about staying safe and getting money. Slash thought that Creed was one of the bands that did something to make rock music less powerful. A smoother, more marketable version of rock had taken the place of the grunge movement, which brought rebellion, angst, and authenticity to the masses. And even though Creed did well, they were a part of that change. Rock music used to be known for raw feelings, but their music wasn't like that at all. It was carefully made to fit a mold, which Slash couldn't stand. Slash thought that Creed wasn't really a rock band, but rather a band that had been commercialized and shaped by the business. They weren't trying to break new ground. They were just making songs that people would want to buy. The way Slash sees rock music is that it should be real, intense, and raw. It's not about making something safe or reliable for everyone. Real feelings, which are often messy and not well thought out, are talked about. The music in Creed, on the other hand, seemed too planned. Their sound may have touched a lot of people, but Slash thought it was without the soul that real rock music should have. The polished and safe music of Creed didn't push anyone to think differently or question them. It was smooth to listen to, but it didn't make me feel anything. Slash didn't just dislike Creed's sound, he also didn't like the way rock music went in the late 90s and early 2000s. Instead of being about rebellion, raw feeling and energy, the genre had turned into something safe and mainstream. This change was best shown by bands like Creed. They were successful, but their success was based on a model that didn't fit with what rock was all about. Creed's music was meant to make people happy, but it didn't go deep or make people think about anything. And for Slash, that was going against the roots of rock. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And make sure to click on the next video popping up on your screen for more rock insights.